Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Live Your Genius podcast. I am your host, Annalena, and today I am beyond delighted and excited to announce a very special guest speaker. His name is Gay Hendricks, and you may have heard about him. I will read his bio so you get to understand all the beautiful work he has done over many, many years. And then after that, I will also share a little bit of how his work has impacted my journey so far. And then you will get to enjoy our wonderful conversation. So, Gay Hendricks has served for more than 30 years as one of the major contributors to the fields of relationship transformation and body mind therapies. And along with his wife, Dr. Kathleen Hendricks, Gay is the author of many bestsellers, including Conscious Living, At the Speed of Life, The Big Leap, the New York Times bestseller, Five Wishes, and the recently released Your Big Leap Year. I have it right in my hands here. And Dr. Hendricks received his PhD in counseling psychology from Stanford in 1974. And after a 21-year career as a professor at University Colorado, he founded the Hendricks Institute and later co-founded its charitable organization, the Foundation for Conscious Living. He was also the founder of a virtual learning center for transformation and a publishing company, and was a co-founder of a conscious entertainment company. And throughout his career, he has done executive coaching with more than 800 executives, including the top management at such firms as Dell Computer, Hewlett-Packard, Motorola, and KLM. And his book, The Corporate Mystic, is used widely to train management in combining business skills and personal development tools. Gay is also a mystery novelist with a series of 5 books featuring the Tibetan Buddhist private detective Tenzing Norbu. In recent years, he has co-created a popular podcast called The Big Leap with Gay Hendricks and Mike Koenigs, and he has also appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC, 48 Hours, and others. So as you can imagine, I'm beyond blessed and grateful that he said yes to coming onto my podcast and have a wonderful conversation. And I have discovered his work many, many years ago, especially the work that he's also doing around relationships and conscious living together with his wife, Katie. And I just love his super genuine and down-to-earth approach. And anything that he has put out there so far always has deeply resonated with me. And even before Human Design found me, I believe I was already familiar with his work. And every single piece, especially the book he has written, always left a very positive impact on me. And a few years when I was training for a half marathon, I remember I kept listening to The Big Leap to move beyond my upper limits that I was putting on myself. And The Big Leap is a book that many in the self-development and the coaching industry talk about. And this year, I actually started my own journey with The Big Leap here. I have been also sharing some videos on my YouTube channel, and I just find his approach so incredibly amazing. And without further ado, you now get to enjoy a wonderful conversation that I had with Gay Hendricks recently. May you be inspired. Welcome, everyone, to another episode. It's Annalena here, your host. And today I'm probably the most excited I've been in a really long time to introduce my guest, which is the one and only Gay Hendricks. He has written many, many books. And one of them is The Big Leap, which I personally have listened to several times. And he's also the author of Your Big Leap Year, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. And I'm just so happy you're here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so delighted to be here. I'm always happy to talk about this particular subject.
Yeah, and I know you have written many books over the course of your life so far, right? How many?
I've written 51 that have been published.
Wow.
And As a matter of fact, knowing your German heritage, The Big
Mhm.
Leap is about to be published in the German language, I believe, sometime in the fall.
Oh, that's really good to know. I have to tell my sisters about it. Mm, that's wonderful. Yeah, I love your work. I just want to say this also the work you do with your wife, Kathleen. It's so deeply inspiring. And what I love the most, it's so authentic and grounded. It's not hyped up, right? It's just like the real essence of what it means to live this beautiful life. And yeah, it's very inspiring. So I'm going to share in a little while a little bit more about my journey with this right now, but I would love to hear from you first because the big leap is something that we talk a lot about in the coaching space and when it comes to self-development work, you know, how we sabotage ourselves. And I would just love to hear your story of how this all came about that inspired you to write the book.
Yes, well, when people ask me that, sometimes people ask me, how long did it take to write The Big Leap? And I said, well, it took me 6 months to a year to write the actual book, but I've
Mhm.
been thinking about it for 35 years. And
Mhm.
so I started thinking about what The Big Leap is all about around 1980. And I started thinking about it particularly because I was working with executives in a lot of high tech firms. And they were really brilliant people intellectually, but they had such disaster relationships because I came to spot something that I started calling the upper limit problem,
Mhm.
which the first time I noticed it was a guy I was working with, a big executive. His boss came in on a Friday afternoon and said, "Congratulations, Frank. The new product you designed is taking off better than we ever expected. And I've been authorized by the board to give you a $150,000 bonus." And he handed him a check for 150,000. Now, here's the thing. The guy that received it, the guy I was working with later when all this happened, he said he was already making $180,000 a year. So $150,000 was virtually what
Almost
he made
double.
an entire year.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, it wouldn't have mattered even if it had been $1 instead of $150,000 because everybody has got an upper limit switch in them. And for some of us, all we got to do is have an extra dollar and then we get excited and lose it immediately.
Mhm.
That's what happens with people who win the lottery.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly the statistics, but last time I looked, when I was researching the Big Leap, close to 50% of them lose the money and end up often worse than they were off before they got the big influence. And so something has to account for that. And I started calling it the upper limit problem. So I started looking, like with this executive, he got the big bonus. He went home that afternoon and, according to him, started the biggest fight he'd ever had with his wife in 12 years of marriage. And it even involved their kids too, their young kids. And so he ended up having this big win, wow, at work.
Mhm.
And then this super crash a few hours later when he got to the front door. What accounts for that? Well, I started looking into that because I started noticing in little bits and pieces in my own life too. Like I was overweight at the time and I would go on a diet and I would do all right for about 3 days. And then something would happen along about the third or
Mhm.
fourth day. And I said, oh gosh, I had a stick of gum. Therefore, I can eat this quart of ice cream. My mind would immediately jump to that. And I started noticing the upper limit problem in my body. And that's how I lost a lot of weight. And I'm 80 now, but I'm very trim and athletic looking and work out at the gym 3 days a week and that kind of thing.
Wow.
But in those
Wow.
days, I was much more tubular shaped, like a pear,
Mhm.
than I am now. Um, but what got it all started was this one moment of realizing, oh my gosh, my problem with food is part of a bigger problem I have, which I call the upper limit problem, which is I don't know how to handle that much positive energy.
Yeah.
So here comes somebody, let's say, with a $150,000 check. If I'm used to operating at a certain levels, that's going to kind of blow me away and stirs up old fears and that kind of thing. And So as I began to look into this, I found that there are only a few fears that are underneath the upper limit problem. And one of them is this fear that I think a lot of us carry around, which is a fear that I'm not worthy of
Mm.
having a totally positive, loving, good, successful, abundant life. Many of us have some kind of a glitch in there that says, I can be rich, but I got to be miserable in my relationships. Or I can be the most loving person in the world, but I got to be poor to
Mhm.
do it. And
Mhm.
so, wherever you find those upper limits, my fervent appeal to you is to go in there and clear them out, because none of them are true. They're all made up of mind stuff, and they can be unmind stuffed in a split second.
Yeah, I love that you say this because I always thought I'm the only one that has this problem, upper limit problem. But through your work, especially, I started to realize, oh, this is very common for us humans, right? Because exactly what you say, I can relate very much to this. Like, if something goes really well, it's almost like my ego is on the hunt for something now bad has to happen, so I compensate it, right? And I'm back to my baseline. There's also something about what I allow to, or what I consider as safe, right? I guess if I'm used to struggling in one area of my life and then something goes really well, somehow it doesn't feel safe, right?
Well, that was my experience. And one of the things that led me into writing The Big Leap was I noticed that the upper limit problem really affected my relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That I would This was in my pre-Katie days. Katie and I have been, Kathleen and I, we call her Katie here in the house. Um, Katie and I have been together for 45 years now. So in my pre-Katie
Congratulations.
days, though, I like to say I became a relationship expert by making every possible mistake that it's possible to make in relationships. But in my teens and 20s, I had a number of different relationships, and some of them were a half a year, a couple of them were 2 years, one of them was 3.5, 4 years, something like that. But I got to a point and they just dissolved somehow. And I could never figure out why. And I started blaming it on the other people. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
women are like that, that kind of a thing. But that kind of thinking doesn't get you very far in life. It's only till you start kind of going inside and saying, what am I doing that causes my relationships to disintegrate after 6 months or 2 years? I'm not going to blame it on the other people anymore. I'm going to go inside and find out what it is, because I'm the one that it's been happening to. There have been 17 different women, but it's only happened to me over and over again. I
Yes.
think the greatest one-liner I've ever heard, the most poignant one anyway, I had a fellow in therapy some years ago that from the time he was 17 years old, he'd had well over a dozen relationships which had all ended with the woman splitting
Mm-hmm.
suddenly for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
One of them I'm going to go back to school. Another one says, I don't like you anymore. Another one says, whatever. But that had the theme all the way through of a woman suddenly disappearing. And so, like a good Psych 101 person, I said, what happened to you in your early life that resembles this? Did you ever have a personal experience of a woman splitting? And he said, oh, yeah. He said, I never thought of that. And then he told me the story of his father, who had four little boys, and my client was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife ran off with a traveling salesman or something. And my client never saw his mother again when he was 4 years old. And he said to me in therapy, the great one-liner was, I'm wondering if it has something to do with me. And so I think we are so programmed oftentimes by society not to look benignly under the surface to ourselves. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are freaked out by the idea of, going to counseling or self-improvement in some way. because they're afraid of what they're going to discover in there. And so there's a tremendous amount of defensiveness. In fact, in relationship counseling, there's almost always one person that wants to be there and the other person who got dragged there,
Yeah.
you know? And oftentimes, I mean, classically, it's the woman that wants to be there and the man in that kind of a relationship that is dragging his heels. It's different now a little bit. And the first time I saw that study, there was a study that said that the first call to a therapist to ask for help in a relationship, 95% of them come from a woman. And so, and you kind of intuitively know that, but it was interesting to see that in print. And that's changed a little bit over the years. Here we work with couples, of course, because of our book, Conscious Loving, and other relationship books we wrote.
Mhm.
And a surprising number of them come from men. Here's another interesting thing. At our seminars, when we first started doing our relationship seminars way back in the 1980s, 3 out of 4 people that signed up for them were women. And we were always trying to, encourage men. Then something happened around 1990 or so. And steadily throughout the 90s, more and more and more men started coming to our training, so that now, even the ones that aren't for couples, we get about 50% men and 50% women. I think that says a lot about how
Yeah.
men have awakened, especially over the past 30 or 40 years.
Yeah. And I have to say, a lot of the teachers that I follow, in terms of my own self-development, they're men like you. So I find there's actually a lot of very wise, very conscious men out there. And I love to hear that statistic, because I can totally see how there's a little bit of a dogma out there that it's mainly like women that want to do it. And I also love what you said about, it's so easy for us to say like, oh, we blame other people, like why the relationship didn't work, or why something is not going well in my business or life overall, but really to have this courage to, okay, I am the only constant here in all of these experiences.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe there's something within me that's not fully allowing this. So I wanted to share with you also that, so I have started, this happened on my birthday about a month ago. I had this like insight for me to go on this journey, because I have read the other book, The Big Leap, which is awesome. The last time I listened to the audiobook was when I was training for a half marathon. It was very empowering. I finished it. I did it.
Congratulations.
So yeah, part of this was definitely your work, because the first time I did it, I injured myself, or I think I got COVID at the time, so I didn't do it. But the next year, I did it. I ran the Miami Half Marathon. But I did find myself then not really take consistent action on it. It's this amazing book, and I loved all the concepts, but you know how it is to actually implement it. And
Sure.
when I heard about this version now, so basically this is the idea of the Big Leap book that has been out for many years already. And you break it down into very digestible 1 day action steps. And I am in day 29 so far. I even have been creating little YouTube videos every day to hold myself accountable, to share about your work, to perhaps inspire other people. And it's so profound for me. One thing I want to share that I'm noticing, especially right now, while I have been allowing myself to feel more good more of the time, I'm also noticing a lot of stuff come up. Kind of my biggest limiting beliefs, the self-sabotage, and it's almost like the old part of me that I'm ready to let go of. There's
Mhm.
also a part of me that's scared of that. You know what I mean?
Of course, because for one thing, like if you think about one of those central limiting beliefs, like the
Hmm.
belief that I don't deserve the good things of life,
Yeah.
abundance, good success, good health. A lot of people, surprisingly, even a lot of people who are highly functioning still carry that around beneath them, beneath the surface. But the others are equally important, I think. Like another limiting belief is for some reason, I don't deserve the spotlight. I'm supposed to serve people who are in the spotlight, but I'm not supposed to carry the light myself and show the light myself. So it's kind of the perpetual number two. I need to be number two, and somebody else is always number one. And so that's a limiting belief because it's usually based on some kind of an old family paradigm where somebody in the family was the golden boy or the golden girl and you weren't it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was the case for me anyway. My older brother was the golden boy and could do no wrong. And so I could do no right because I had to follow 8 years later in his footsteps. And I was constantly being compared to him. And finally, I even uh, asked my seventh grade teacher not to do it anymore because he would always, oh, Mike was so good at geometry, and you're so bad at it. And I went to a little tiny school where every member of my family had
Yeah.
been there for the last 3 generations. My first grade teacher taught my mom when she was in first grade.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, it
Yeah.
was one of those small little southern towns and that kind of thing that I grew up in. Probably doesn't happen that much anymore. But anyway, what I'm getting at is that no matter where you got it from, we come with these limiting beliefs. And the only way you get to see them is as you get growing up, you begin to see places in your life where you're not thriving. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's the thing that I invite my clients to look. See, look at any place that's not thriving and remove the upper limits so that you at least have the possibility of thriving.
Mm-hmm.
I had a 56-year-old, very successful woman come to me, um, CEO of her own organization that she had founded and, operated a large team and all that kind of thing, wildly successful. And she said to me, I asked her about relationships and is that a goal for you in the first session? And she said, nah. She said, I've been married 2 times
Mm-hmm.
and I know what the statistics are that every time you're married, the divorce statistics go up.
Mm-hmm.
Like the statistics for first marriages are 50% or so, 57% for second marriages, and way up there for third marriages. And so it's clear that either people aren't learning quickly enough, they carry it into future relationships. That's the simple explanation. So, anyway, she said to me, at age 56, I have better chances of being kidnapped by terrorists than falling in love and
Mm-hmm.
having a successful relationship. I don't know where she'd read that, but that was an interesting metaphor. As we worked together, though, and kind of cleared up some of the pain in her that she'd been carrying around from those early relationships, she hatched a new idea. Well, maybe I could thrive in a loving, close relationship and it could last because she'd never been in that or really even seen that very much in her life because she didn't grow up that way. And so I'm very happy to report that I recently heard from them on their 22nd anniversary.
Oh.
So it's possible to kind of come out of that place of despair and not just in relationships, but I've worked with a bunch of entrepreneurs in my career. I think I've worked with something like 1,200 entrepreneurs over the past 40 years, and a surprising number of them went bankrupt more than once before they hit it big.
Mm.
Wow. Because you think oftentimes if a person's got the magic touch, they've got the magic touch. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of learning and a lot of coming to terms with failure, and particularly a lot of clearing up your own internal limiting
Mm-hmm.
beliefs because nobody gets to be successful and wealthy by always pointing out there. You get in there by saying, okay, let me remove the limits first in here and then build a team around that.
Yeah. So kind of what I hear you say is also this idea that, everything we go through in life, especially the struggles and when we kind of fall, what we consider as failure, that's all the beautiful learning lessons where actually these upper limits we have often deep in our unconscious, right? They come to the surface so that we then get to actually we become aware of them, and then we can start to shift them. I think the chapter I was reading, I think it was today, was called Snap, right? Where you say that, hey, we have a limiting belief where we're telling ourselves a story where we can't or we shouldn't. And then we shift it around into like, well, I commit to finding a way to be successful in this area of my life, you know? And it's even like when I just say those things, the energy in my body, it just immediately shifts, right? And even though
Yes.
I don't know how I'm going to make it work, it really comes from this like, it's almost like I'm shifting the energy within myself and redirecting in a new direction.
That's really important insight. I really appreciate you bringing that out, because what's necessary is not only to look into your fear and find out what it is that's
Mm,
stopping you, but also it's important to then go to the flip side of that and say, what is the positive thing that I want to create? Because every time you're being stopped by fear, there's something you really want to create, but you haven't figured out how to do that yet in an easeful way.
mm,
One way you can start the process is by saying to myself and to the universe, I want change to be friendly. I realize sometimes that it has to be harsh for whatever reason, but my preference is that I would like to to learn the lessons of my life gently rather than painfully.
That's
I've
also
learned in my own
powerful.
life journey
Mm,
that life either tickles us with a feather to teach us, or
mhm,
it bangs us over the head with a sledgehammer if we're not paying attention. And
mhm,
usually I found in my own learning that the times I've had the sledgehammer, I've usually ignored the feather tickle half
mm,
a dozen times. You know, the little intuitive voice that was saying, don't do this. Uh,
mm,
one business failure I had about 10 years ago, I got involved with with a famous self-help superstar who turned out to be not a good business person. I later found
mhm,
out he'd been bankrupt a bunch of times and everything, and but I didn't know that. And it looked like, you know, sometimes I got seduced into things by thinking, okay, that'd be pretty easy, and it wouldn't cost me anything, you
mm,
know. And but every time I make those kind of little niggly wiggly decisions, I get punished for that. You know, it turned out to be a disaster. Fortunately, it
yeah.
was only a 6 month disaster and only cost me, you know, 100 grand or so. But still, that's having to pay for your lessons. The universe doesn't need us to pay for our lessons. We
Mm,
just have lessons to learn, and it's our own resistance that makes the universe look like an unsafe place. And
mm,
so we need to get friendly with our own learning, first of all, and get comfortable with, you know, learning to love ourselves for our shortcomings and learning to embrace ourselves for our failings, what we think of as failings. So
mm.
many times in my own life, I don't know if you've realized this, but things that look like failures on the surface later on look like tremendous gifts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like I was in this long 4 year relationship, which was very painful. And we had I realized one day that we weren't arguing every week. We were having the same argument at least once a week that
Mm,
we'd been having for 4 years. So we'd had hundreds of times. Ugh, you know, once I realized that, how could I have been such a machine? You know, oh, push a button, he goes immediately into that argument. You know, nobody likes to kind of confront the machine parts of themselves, but you have to at some point. That you have to realize sometimes when people push the right button, you just go automatic. You know, you don't really think about it. So it took me many, many years to learn how to embrace myself in a friendly way, how to love myself, how to accept the things that I found disappointing in myself
mm,
rather than criticizing them. Why not just embrace them and love them and use my own natural resources of love and compassion on myself as well as other people? What a concept, huh? I
yeah.
mean, I remember where I was standing when that dawned on me. Really, and I was probably in my late 20s or early 30s when I even had that thought. So anyway, I'm saying that it doesn't matter so much how long it takes you to wake up to that. I was lucky in a way. I woke up to it when I was around 30. But I've had people in my office right here who were waking up to that at age 70 because their partner that had was putting ultimatums on them, saying, look, you got to get it together or I'm out of here.
Mm.
And we've had people in, it's hard for me to believe sometimes how long people can carry pain, but we've had couples that have had basically struggle throughout 50 years of marriage about things that could have been cleared up in a couple of good sessions of counseling early on. But, we human beings suffer from what it is, I think the old timers used to call the sin of pride, thinking that we can outfox everything and outfox our own ego, which is ridiculous. And that's why 12-step programs are so important for addicts, because to get in the door, you got to say, my name is John and I'm an alcoholic, which, takes you out of the realm of illusion and puts you
Yeah.
into the realm of reality. And
Mhm.
I have friends that are in 12-step programs that resisted that moment for years,
Mhm.
resisted because everybody else was telling them, John, you're an alcoholic. You better face it, son. But they were saying, well, I can heal it if I want to, I can quit if I want to. And that's not just to single out people with addictions, too. I think pride is one of those things that keeps us from asking for help when we need help, sometimes the
Yeah.
most.
Yeah. What I love so much, because this whole idea of self-love, I think we can widely misunderstand it. Because from what you are sharing, what I really hear the most is the essence of being honest and authentic with ourselves. Like that, loving myself means like I haven't figured it all out, right? Or I have these big fears. Or like you say, when somebody finally admits that they have a problem with alcohol addiction or whatever, because that's like just facing and embracing the truth, you know? And I think that's because it has to do with acceptance, right? I think really acceptance is the biggest energy of really loving ourselves, and from really also embracing where we're at, because I know especially in the self-development world, there's always like about these big goals and everything. But if that takes you away from actually allowing and accepting where you're at and always trying to chase something, at least from my journey, that always was the most detrimental for me. And when I can just focus on where I am at, what am I here to learn, and also go with the divine timing of my path, it's different for all of us.
Yes, there's an old saying that nobody on their deathbed is talking about their calendar appointments. I recently had the experience of being with a very dear friend of mine as he was passing away at age 82. And I was with him for several days before he passed. And then in the last hours of his life, we were there. And the the thing that's on people's minds is love, kind of love in all its forms. Oh, I was mean to, I've had people say as they were passing away, I remember being mean to a kid in my kindergarten class.
Mm.
Little moments where they weren't living in love and compassion. I think we have a human agenda, a curriculum that comes along with being human, which is to come to understand ourselves and to learn how to accept the love and attention that comes our way, learn to thrive on that. And we, until we get to that place where we're thriving in full loving attention, I think that we're hurting in some way, and we need to open up that area to be more receptive of love and attention and abundance and the good things of life. So I think that life is trying to teach us to live more, live better, live well, which
Mhm.
involves a lot of emotional acceptance of ourselves as well as acceptance of where we are in our lives out there economically and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, I love that perspective. That's so powerful. And I have a question for you because I have been hearing from you, listening to the audiobook and also from other podcast appearances and your work overall, that you have really become masterful with enjoying feeling really good more of the time. And also you have barely gotten sick, which is it's incredible. It's such a beautiful testimony of your work and really role modeling this. Now, I wondered sometimes, okay, like he no longer feels sad or he no longer feels any of the uncomfortable emotions. So I was like, probably not, because that's part of the human experience. But how do you move through that?
Oh,
That you no longer let these things hold you back? Or are there still fears coming up for you? Like, how do you navigate this?
I've found that the best way to deal with fear, anger, sadness, those emotions that are
Mhm.
natural and normal to human life, the best way to deal with them is through loving acceptance. Because I tried criticizing them out of me and that didn't work. And
Yeah.
so it's like a dog biting its own tail and saying, quit that, quit that, quit that.
Yeah.
And can't you see I'm hurting me? But it took me many, many instances of going in there and learning to love my own sadness and learning to love my own anger and fear. So I think the way to do it is just to be with it.
Mhm.
It's like probably it's, I mean, if you think about it, our feelings have been around a lot longer than our thoughts have. Basically, the upper part of the brain, the cortex, hasn't really changed all that much over the past 50,000 years or so. You know, we learned to operate machinery now, but 50,000 years ago, we were learning how to chip rocks and we were figuring out things, basically. And here we are still 50,000 years later figuring out things. But you got to realize that our emotions, our sensations have been around literally for millions of years. That long before we had the thought, is this a good feeling I ought to be having, or is this a bad feeling I ought to be having? We were having that feeling,
Yeah,
because there's,
we started to label them at some point, right? To make them right and wrong.
yes, yes, exactly. And that's where our problems begin. So if you have a right or wrong relationship, say with your sexuality, well, that's a problem because sex is what got us here. And, if you refuse to participate in that area of life, you need to figure out, is that a good thing for me or is that a bad thing for me? And so a lot of people find out it's not a good thing for them because they end up, their religious beliefs end up making them sick. And so they seek treatment that are simply because they are repressing their sexuality in some way.
Mhm.
So learning how to express your sexuality in a smart way is a very key fundamental thing in life. A second fundamental thing is how you express anger. Do you express anger in a way that lashes out and it becomes a you son of a gun? It
Mm.
becomes a um, a weapon you're hurling with your words. That way of expressing anger usually gets us into trouble.
Yeah.
If you try to do that in a modern corporation today, you'd be intervened upon. I know, I've been part of those interventions. I've been on the therapy end of those interventions where they say, "Hey, fix this guy because he's messing up the culture by going around banging on people's desks all the time." So, you learning to express anger in a straightforward way, like saying to somebody, "I feel angry at you, and because dot dot dot." So those moments, same thing with sadness. I feel sad is a beautiful statement of who I am and where I am in a moment. It also requires me to go down in there and feel it to know that I'm sad. Otherwise, somebody comes along and say, "Hey, you look sad today." No, I'm fine.
Yeah, right.
Everything good. Yep.
Yeah.
And we all know people that kind of do that. They hide a lot of inner anxiety with a lot of hype, revved up rah, 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 rah on the surface. And same thing with fear. Fear is our big one. We've got to come to terms with fear. If you're a student of life, you become a student of fear because you see that fear is what holds you back a lot of times. What am I afraid of? I've asked myself many times, learning how to not only be with your fear, but also sort of learn from it. Say, what am I really afraid of? Am I afraid of rejection? Am I afraid of not fulfilling my potential? So get honest with your fear. Get in there and talk to it person to person. I've done it 1,000 times. And every time you do that, you get a little bit more of that you and me relationship with your emotions. And it's a lot about you and me, what goes on inside, learning to lovingly accept that which you've been criticized for and criticized yourself for over the years. And learning to do that, it doesn't matter if you're 30 or 16 or 83, at some point, life is going to require you to do that in order to become more fulfilled. And I say, wherever you are, go ahead and love yourself extravagantly for wherever you've been and whatever you've done, and accept yourself fully for all the things you are and aren't, and watch the new things of life begin to spring into form in front of you.
Yeah, I love it. I would like to talk a little bit more about anger because I totally resonate with this concept. We don't want to use our anger to project it on other people and lash out, and they're at the fault, like you described it. For me, as a very more introverted person and also nice girl syndrome that you're probably familiar with through your work, I always, growing up, found myself, even as an adult for a really long time, suppress anger because fear, one of the biggest fears I always had was fear of rejection, and then feeling the discomfort of an argument and things like that. As I have noticed that, so I use a lot of EFT tapping these days, for example. So when I get triggered and I actually feel angry, I let it out. I let out the anger. I speak to myself or the God, universe in some way to just like, that's how I feel. Or punch a pillow in some way. And that has been so liberating for me. And also, it has helped me to become more the empowered version of myself, like the woman, right? And also sometimes, actually, when I got angry, like it gave me even the motivation to finally do it. So I would love to hear a little bit of your take on how we can alchemize anger in a positive way, how it's a good thing.
Well, your body will often give you direct feedback that you're not dealing with anger very well. One way is through making you tight or headachy up
Mm.
the back of your neck and into your head and temples, because those muscles tighten up when we're angry. And if you go ahead and express it, those release a little bit, but you got to be careful when you do that. You don't want to do that in front of your boss when you're asking for a raise.
Yeah.
Um, so you have to be smart about expressing anger, but you have to be open to that energy. Ideally, we deal with anger at the moment. If somebody is standing on your foot in an elevator, you say, "Excuse me, you're standing on my foot. Would you move?" And they'll move. The anger disappears. But if they don't move, they say, "Tough luck. I'm going to stand where I want to stand." Well, then your anger builds. And so we need to learn how to savor our anger enough so that we're not just popping off with the tiniest little provocation. Anger, to understand it a little deeper, a lot of anger is about unfairness. It's about you see something that looks unfair to you, or you experience something. Somebody's telling you, well, you can't have a raise because we've already given out all our raises this year. And then you say, okay, well, and then if you try to argue with that, there's usually some other thing. So if you get frustrated and don't know how to deal with it, it's a problem in human life, and especially in the workplace, because a lot of people go around angry at each other. They don't know how to express it. They don't know how to deal with it. And so it kind of stays under the surface. But you know how things that are pushed under the surface don't stay there. They pop up in the form of gossip, and they pop up in the form of criticism and sabotage and those kinds of things, because people aren't being direct about things like, I felt angry when you dot dot dot, or I feel sad about dot dot dot, or I'm scared that we're dot dot dot. All of those things are important communications that need to be made to have relationships work. And it doesn't matter if it's relationship at home or relationships in Congress. It's works the same way.
Mm.
And every day, especially at the political level, you see examples of how not to do it,
Yeah.
because people are saying, I'm mad and it's all your fault. And the other side says, no, I'm mad and it's all your fault. And if you'd only understand that, we'd be able to get along. Well,
Mm.
we see how that doesn't work.
Yeah, thank you for those reflections. Yeah, it's a very powerful, mature move when we can just express that we are angry, but we're still owning it, and we don't need to make it go away and just let it be, but not have the other person kind of fix it. Just really honor how we personally feel about it. That's definitely, yeah, very, very powerful. Now, I keep looking at the picture behind you, Einstein, which for me immediately also the genius, right? Because very much also in this book, The Big Leap and your big leap year, you talk about this concept of living in your genius more. And a lot of the work I do, so I work with more spiritual tools, human design, gene keys, um, where I have often worked with people, when they have this spark in their eye. And I always say, like, do what comes most effortless and easy to you. That's one of the reasons I so much resonate with your work, because I find that they are exactly how you explain it. And I would just love to hear from you. What's your life experience like when you are more spending time in your zone of genius versus when you're more in the zone of competence or some of the other zones, where we're not really fully living our potential?
Well, the four zones that I talk about in the Big Leap: the zone of incompetence, where you're doing something you're not good at and
Yeah.
you don't like doing; the zone of competence, which you're doing something you're okay at, but anybody else could do it just about as okay. The third zone is really where we have to focus, because that's where a lot of us are getting stuck. The zone of excellence is the zone when you're calling on a lot of your gifts, but you're doing it for somebody else usually.
Yeah.
You're using your gifts in favor of somebody else. And if you're conscious about doing that, great. But a lot of people, the more they're in their zone of excellence, they want to live in that fourth zone, the zone of genius. The genius zone is where the big fun is. It's where you're doing what you love to do, like I'm doing right now and what you're doing right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
You're doing what you love to do, and you're doing it in a way that makes a contribution to other people. Our
Mm.
intention is that this contributes to other people out there on
Yes.
the other end watching this video or listening to this um, podcast. So the idea that you can live and in a constant state of doing what you love and making your biggest contribution is why I'm still here talking about this years
Mm-hmm.
later.
Yeah.
I'm 80 now. I've been basically talking about this half my life, and I'm having just as much fun talking about it now as I did 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
I continue to have as much fun and have as much energy in helping people discover their genius as I did when I first discovered my own way back.
Yeah. I can say when I was reviewing the zones for myself that I got stuck the most in the zone of excellence for sure. I was working in corporate and even in my entrepreneurship. It's now almost 6 years. There have been many times where I was in my zone of genius, but I was more caring about others and not so much about myself. And the more I have let go of this, I find myself more and more in the zone of genius. It's a quite profound realization, because I think it's for me when I'm not fully trusting myself, or I feel like I can't do it myself. I have to rely on other people, or I have to please other people. That's when I get stuck in this like excellence zone, or people tell me like, "Oh, you're so good at it." That feels very flattering, and yeah, I may be really good at it, but there's something that I even enjoy doing more, and I was always, even in high school, I was like, well, I'm so good at so many things, which is great. but that really showed me also how I can be so much vulnerable to this zone of excellence because, yeah, I'm good at a lot of things, and actually to say no to those, even though I'm really good at it,
Mm.
that was a very big aha moment for me when I was reflecting on it. And definitely my biggest zone of, yeah, awareness and that I'm still really working on to be even more, which I think I already have a very good taste of it. And one thing I would love to hear from you, what advice would you give when people have, well, probably snap out of the limiting belief, but when we have this idea, well, my whole way of how I'm supporting myself financially in my life is in my zone of excellence, right? And it's probably not going to happen overnight that we shift into the zone of genius. Like, what's your biggest tip here to make it a reality where eventually you're really fully living in your zone of genius and also have this support you in all areas of life?
The first thing is to make a commitment to your genius.
Yeah.
One of the things that happens in this room is people go from not being fully committed to their genius to fully committed. And it's a beautiful light that
Mhm.
turns on in people, even though they don't know how to get there yet. Just the idea that it's possible. That's one reason, if I may brag on my picture of Albert Einstein, Katie gave that to me one year for our anniversary. It's an autographed picture of Albert
Oh,
Einstein.
wow. That's
And
special.
yeah, I'm a cheerleader for something that he was good at, which is wonder. I mean, if you look at Albert Einstein, even if you look at a picture of him, you don't see that he's criticizing his way to the secrets of the universe. He's open to wonder. In fact, in his notebooks, there's a subject in physics that he said he wondered about every day for 27 years. Wow, that's a lot of wondering time he put in before he figured out the answer. And so I think wonder is an underused human superpower because wonder takes us out of the zone of fear. You may be in fear one moment and you say, okay, I'm scared, but let me wonder a little bit about what do I really want? Hmm.
Mm.
The moment you shift into wonder, you shift out of the zone where fear takes place.
Yeah.
So I'm just picture me with a cheerleader uniform on and the at the side of the field and the Super Bowl, jumping up and down about the subject of wonder.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. No, and this is how you start the book, It's so good to hear it from you again, because I even love how you incorporate the sound to actually
Hmm.
ground it in the body. And yeah, the power of questions and the power of wonder. Yeah, I love that so much. It's oftentimes I think it's the simple things that really give us the biggest transformation, but we're trying to make it complicated as humans, because it's really not that complicated. And it's more like how children teach it to us. They keep asking curious, wonder questions all the time.
I think it's a gift that we're given that we need to use every day. Well,
Yeah.
great talking to you. I see the old clock on the wall is pointing me
Yes.
toward my next appointment. So let me say any final words you want me to say, and then I'm going to slip out of here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was about to ask you, what's your final nugget of wisdom you would like to leave the listeners with? I mean, you have such a wealth of life experience.
Happiness, deep happiness, comes from opening up to yourself each day, saying, what do I want? How do I feel? What truth needs to be revealed in me today? So, revealing the truth to yourself and taking, just starting with 10 minutes a day on expressing your genius. Like I had a dentist who wanted to be a poet, and I had him just block out 10 minutes and write a poem, write one line of a poem. It didn't matter, whatever he could do in that 10 minutes. And that little investment led him to publish 3 poems in a dental journal. I mean, it just led to all sorts of changes in his life. And it wasn't just opening up to his poetry, it was opening up to his feeling, his emotion, who he really was.
Yeah, I love that. I will write that down and do it myself. Thank you so much, Gay. It was such a delightful conversation. I could obviously talk to you forever. I'm so deeply honored for your time, for sharing your wisdom with us. And you listeners, I'm very sure you deeply enjoyed this conversation. Go re-listen to it again. And I'm excited to be back with you all on the next episode. Thank you so much, Gay.
Thank you. Great being with you.